Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Brewster. I'm an agriculture consultant. I've been self-employed for the last 13 years. Prior to that, I took a year out to travel the world looking at farms abroad. And before that, I worked for the college for, or SAC as it is called, 5 or so years. My mother and my brother managed the home farm in Angus near Forfar. It's been converted to organic agriculture since the 80s. A few years ago, my wife and I bought a few fields just to play around with because there's a few things I wanted to trial, which is 23 acres, which is probably enough just for most of the farmers in the audience to turn their combines around in, but it's enough for me to have a wee bit of a play. It's mostly sheep, but there's 5 acres we've decided we'll have for our own research. We're doing varying types of cultivations in the same field, trying to grow the same crop. Oats and swedes is what we're playing with at the moment. We've had a few failures, but again, our land at home is organic too. We're based near Kingsmuir, but something we found interesting that will relate to us all is we've done a total nutrient test of the soil in the fields, and we found it's less than a tenth of the available nutrients there are in the soil. So there's a vast bank of nutrients available in the soil for plants to use. We just need to make them available. So before we kick off, I'll just introduce the panel. So on my left here, we've got Julian Bell. He's worked for the SRUC for the last 17 years. His role is a business consultant for the firm's carbon calculator, AgriCalc. He also advises on economic and market issues, in addition to the carbon-related advice. Prior to his role, the SRUC, he worked for HGC for close to 7 years, and latterly he was a senior economist of grain markets for them. On my right here, we've got Roddy McLean. He's Director of Agriculture of the NatWest Group, which includes the Royal Bank of Scotland, as he is in his team colours for that today. He's been employed by the group for the last 18 years, or 18 and a half years, and prior to that he worked for SAC for 21 years, and mostly as a consultant, but there was a few years managing one of the SAC's farms up near Elgin. Roddy also helps out from time to time on the farm. His son looks after near St Boswell's, and his daughter-in-law's farm in Lanarkshire. He's seen as a student by them both, but I'm pleased to say the student has not broken anything recently. On my far right is Stuart McNichol from Castleton Farm on the North Berwick coast. The farm is the new East Lothian Monitor Farm. It's 430 acres of sandy clay loam. It rises from sea level to 80 feet. The cropping includes winter wheat for distilling, spring barley for malting, spring beans for export, and some land is suitable for letting for potatoes. Recently, they've planted 2,000 fruit trees, mostly apples, but also 100 pears and 200 plums. Stuart's full-time, and his father helps out from time to time. In the past, he's had an agricultural apprentice. He's reduced his tractors from 3 to 1 in the last few years, and his cultivations have changed to a min-till system, and cover crops are also used. The cover crops are grazed by someone else's sheep, and the use system has reduced his costs significantly. Stuart's wife looks after one of their farm diversifications, which is a cafe called Drift, which one or two of you have possibly been in if you're driving up the A1. Just give me a second here. Got the right bit of paper. Here we go. Right, the topic for discussion today is staying profitable on lower inputs. Controversial words such as organic and regenerative may be mentioned. Please don't be offended. No one is saying you have to do it. What is discussed is a bit of a buffet. You can take what you like and put the rest to the side. But you're the expert on your own farm. But if it does break out into a fight, don't worry, because the ADHDB have kindly sponsored the boxing ring out the back. And just so everybody's clear, I'm going to be the bookie. So they are. But the format is a panel discussion. The floor will be open to questions shortly. But to kick things off, I'd like to ask the panel the first question. The topic for today is staying profitable and lower inputs. Stuart, you've implemented change to lower inputs on your farm for the last number of years. How did you start the process? What has worked and what's not worked? And to other panel members, on the farms you work with, without naming names, what farms have done similar to Stuart, how have they started, and again, what's worked and what's not worked. So Stuart, do you want to kick things off, please?
Morning, everyone. Thank you, David. Castleton Farm, we started back in about 2007. We got rid of the power harrow. That's one of the worst machines you can have on your farm. It's a worm killer. 2007 we got rid of the power harrow, and we went to still ploughing using a unipress. Then we bought our trail drill, a horse pronto, and we dropped from 3 tractors down to 1. So 1 tractor only does 430 acres. We don't need anything else, partly because it's just me on the farm. Dad helps out when he can. We've done variable seed rate, P&K and lime. That certainly helped our reduced our inputs. On the drill side of things, going from losing the power harrow to a trail drill, we reduced our fuel cost by 1/3. So when fuel was expensive back in 2007, that was a huge saving to us. It's a 3-metre system we used to have. We've just gone to a 4-metre system. We're on 28-metre wide tram lines. Reducing tyre pressures on the tractor as well, wide tyres. That's all helped to reduce our costs through fuel. Growing the cover crops has allowed us to put in different soil dynamics, which does reduce our inputs as well for fertiliser. Right.
Thanks, Stuart. Roddy?
For us, we're seeing our customers, some are nibbling away at it, small steps, gaining confidence, trying a bit more. For many, it's a fear of the unknown. There's a lot of information out there, but knowing what is the right information to follow is the challenge for them. So, as in the main, small steps, gain confidence, learn from the lessons. Something that doesn't work isn't a failure. It's just a first attempt at learning. They look again, pick themselves up, shake themselves down, and have another go at something slightly different. But I think the challenge is coming, that pressure will be growing on the sector as a whole to make some larger strides in the not distant future.
Thank you, Roddy. Gillian?
Okay. I think a couple of examples. A couple of examples on the arable side. I think to reduce input costs, a wee bit like Roddy was just suggesting there, is you've got to look further ahead, and your short-term profit maximisation tends to lead you down putting on as much and getting as much output as you can. But if you can stretch out into the future and try and extend your rotation, more cropping, you can start to bring your input costs down but remain profitable. Because I think it's not what you spend on inputs, it's whether you get a value for them is probably the key thing. You know, can you get the output to match them? And extending the rotation takes time to get your money back, but over time you will improve the soil structure, you can bring down your inputs and just focus on the profitable crops. So that's one approach. The other one is to do more intensive, this is more of a mixed farm, dairy, arable, but where they've gone more technology, more precision, measuring all the slurry, precision applying, a lot of sampling, and in that case they cut the fertiliser use by 70%. And so, yeah, there's a whole range of different ways people can do it. Technology, you know, extending rotations, etc. So there's not one size fits all.
Thanks, Gillian. Right, well, I'd like to open the question. open the floor for questions. If anyone's got any questions, can you raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you?
Hello? Yeah. The apple trees and the fruit trees, why did you plant them? How long ago, and when are you going to get produce, and are you getting produce, and where do you sell it?
We planted the trees about a year ago. We were going to put alleyways between our tram lines, but our local roe deer population love apple trees, so we've now ended up in an orchard with a deer fence around it. We have Drift, our coffee house. We use a huge amount of apple juice in it for the customers. So we thought, what, we've got a route to market, why not do something different? Looking at the biodiversity, we've been part of the EAT scheme for the last 5 years. This is our final year. I was going to reapply. I've not. The Scottish Government need to seriously look at their EAT scheme and their tied-in parts for an arable farm, because we could only get 12 points out of, I know I've gone off subject, but we could only get 12 points out of the 21 points we're looking for, which meant more production coming out of land, more land coming out of production. But going back to the apples, we did it for biodiversity, because we need bees on the farm. We just need a different environmental approach to things. But the apples we are going to sell ourselves. We're going to juice. We are looking to do cider as well.
How do you harvest the apples?
It'll be by hand.
Not a shake system?
Not a shake system. And it'll be 3 to 4 years before we start harvesting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions?
George Laurie, Chairman of International Barley Hub, and various other hats. What's the panel's view at looking at non-productive areas of the farm? So concentrating your production in the centre of the field and doing other things with the headlands and things like that. Also back of woods, these type of things. We spend a lot of time putting inputs into these and we don't get the full yield out of these areas. So what's the panel's view in looking at something like that?
Stuart, do you want to, no, sorry, Roddy, do you want to start, since it's really a money question? So,
to me, George, it's quite simple. It's using the assets you have to generate the best possible return. And if you're hammering a field, umpteen passes, it used to be a power harrow, and the cost of that to get half the yield, it would remain questionable to me. And is there a better use that can generate income for you from, whether it's EAC schemes or whatever, then the next iteration of that becomes, I say, standing back and having a look, what can I do as a land manager to generate best return for my business and generate profit to make me sustainable for the long term.
Yeah. No, that's crucial. Yield mapping. You spot these places on the farm, and you're quite right. Is that really worth? Well, is it worth cropping, or what? More importantly, can you do anything about that issue? Obviously, if there is a constraint you just can't deal with, then your actual margin may well go up by not cropping those areas. And that again, it's just using more knowledge, more information, the mapping, putting it to use. And yeah, it's amazing what you will, once people they may want to crop and make everything look tidy and all the rest of it, but it could be a hard decision to leave some areas. But in fact, when you put pen to paper, they actually make sense. So yeah.
Thank you.
It's all been answered.
I was going to change the question for you, if that's okay. On your own farm, are you finding your areas that are, I would say, grass strips or flower areas, are you finding that beneficial for your bees?
Definitely. The EAT scheme, having the wild bird margins, wild bird covers and the field margins, the insects and butterflies and everything that's in there has definitely improved. Being part of the Monitor Farm programme, we will look at to see the beneficials of having these margins around your fields. I know some farmers will be like, arable farmers will be like, but you have to crop up to the hedge, but actually we don't. as George has said there, some of these end rigs are pretty poor. So if you can take them out of production and be more beneficial, potentially I might even put more apple trees in around these. I don't know yet. And from an organics side of the farm with David, I think there's definitely a potential there for more biodiversity, especially in arable farms.
Thank you. Any further questions from?
Julian, really, Andrew Moyer, Scottish Quality Crops Chair. The George described there about the grass margins and flower margins, etc. Would you like to comment, Julian, on how much that might cost a farmer per hectare to actually put that in, and how much perhaps government might wish to give us to do that?
Well, I might struggle to give you an exact figure, to be honest. Well, exactly. Obviously the menu of schemes that are being proposed, different activities, from the farming point of view, the more flexibility you have to judge the payment against what you have to do. But actually from the government side, there's going to be more uptake if there's more flexibility, because farms can choose what suits them. And I mean, that is obviously you've got to cover your fixed costs, you've got your rent, you've got everything else. If it's rented land, you've got, you could be £800,000 a hectare on a lot of farms to cover all those costs. And so to leave land not uncropped is not very difficult to do. But can it return on the inputs? I mean, we obviously saw with the fertiliser spike and things like that, people working really closely at that. Are those payments enough to... There are more obvious ones if you're saving time and cutting down on travel time to get to awkward fields and things like that. I've done work before looking at even just time is incredibly, that's where broadening rotation, having some more break crops, whether they're these margins and things, if you can spread out and reduce your peaks and manage with the people you've got and the machinery you've got, the cost can really start to add up. But that's quite a detailed exercise, to praise these schemes. I think in England they've simplified it and said, you just get this, you do this, you get paid so much, and farmers can kind of take it and leave it, I suppose. But it's very hard to generalise. Everyone's got their own costs. Everyone's going to have to sort of try and work out the real cost benefit on that farm.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's a gentleman in the back.
Yeah, hi, Gordon Rennie. Just in relation to George's question, in England, the RPA, under the Sustainable Farming Initiative, got a whole menu of payments, up to £734 a hectare for legumes. So that's going to answer your question about unprofitable areas, and it might even end some contract farming agreements. So government policy can have a direct influence on what you do on your farm. How would the gentleman like to see the Scottish Government policy develop?
A personal view which I expressed to some of the policy directors at the Highland Show and the SRUC stand last week was that they speak about 2025 as some mythical date in the future. It's only 540 days away. They spoke about still to develop, still work to do. And what I wanted for the industry was clarity, whether they had milestones in place to ensure that was achieved. We need definite clarity. I wondered if they'd a plan B. Apparently not. They've given a, what's the word I'm looking for? They have said they will deliver by 2025, so that's all the guarantee we need. I asked about, you've got this, it's going to be phased, you deliver, it's going to be phased over several years. Will it hit your commitments for 2030? Have you tested it? If it doesn't work, what are you going to do about it? And didn't get much of an answer. But I think we need clarity and real granularity of what they require yesterday, not tomorrow.
I'd certainly add to that they don't have any trial farms out there for any of the options they have coming forward, which is a bit of an oversight. Hopefully the Monitor Farm programme can help there. Also, a tick box exercise is a bit of a dangerous place to go. We've got to make sure we don't get too many options in there for us to adhere to. We're farmers, we're here to produce food. We need to watch what we're doing. We also just be aware of the environmental side of things. I think the EAT scheme is a fantastic opportunity for Scottish farmers, but it's not been delivered well in this next round.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, this, to see what's working, how farmers have approached it. So the piloting is crucial. So really, we're running out of time for that, aren't we? But the flexibility is key. Every farm is different. It's got different constraints, different geography, soils, everything else. In the end, the farmer is going to be the person that can really work out what's going to work there. So the government are getting more uptake. Just what I said before, if they can offer more flexibility, they'll achieve more output. They'll actually achieve more if they give the farmers the flexibility to choose across the country what suits.
Thank you. Is any questions relating to more sort of micro level of farming, like what's on farm, cultivations, or something similar? There's a lady here she even brought her own microphone, so thank you very much.
Well, I'm standing here holding it. I may as well use it. So I'm a researcher. I'm not a farmer. But in the conversation, the first conversation we had this morning, we talked about how do we adapt to the changing climate, and there's a lot of interesting, innovative things people are already doing. But there was also a lot of recognition that every farm has to do what's right for their farm. It's context specific. I just wonder in this conversation, okay, things need to be made tailored to local conditions, but is there one thing or one set of things that is generic that most people could be looking at to reduce inputs and still maintain profitability? Is from the experience of the panel or from the audience? Are there some easy wins, some low-hanging fruits on that?
Julian?
I think, if you can find, I'm not sure if that's right, yeah. The examples I've seen, the farmers have managed to maintain or improve profitability by diversifying to some extent their cropping. There's basically, you go down one route, you absolutely maximise output, or you have a more diverse strategy. It takes more management, but you can end up with, you can get some of the less profitable crops to make sense, like beans, because you can cut your machinery costs, reduce peak loads of labour and things like that. Actually, you can maintain your profitability. It takes more work, and it can be more complicated. So that's one avenue, is sort of diversifying and having a less intensive farming system. But you've got to be an advocate for that. And that only suits some farmers. That's one approach.
Thank you. Stuart?
Cover crops. Cover crops are a great soil conditioner, but you've also got to be aware that it is a crop you're growing. They are weeds, and there is a potential that they will reappear in your following cash crop. But they are beneficial to the ground, they're beneficial to your cropping system. Obviously, you've got to be careful what crop you're growing afterwards. They do increase your inputs. Some of the seed comes from New Zealand and France. It's not the cheapest of stuff to get hold of. You can experiment on farm, but sometimes a lot of experiments have already been done for you. So just go and get a seed from a local merchant. Speak to the organic boys. They might tell you exactly what you have to grow to keep the weeds down. But all farmers have got grain drills. So you've got a disc drill. Go out there and experiment with it. Don't bother just ploughing and power harrowing all the time. See if you can actually go in and min-till, stroke, direct drill with your disc drill that you already have. And choosing your day to go sowing, that's crucial as well. We all say we don't have enough time, but I've got one tractor and 430 acres. It works. Yes, a lot of people have a lot of men on farm. I'll be unisex with that comment. It's all about time management, and that's where you save a lot of money going forward, is time management, and just looking slightly out the box as well.
Thanks, Stuart. There's nobody looking funny, but is there any further questions?
Can I jump straight in there?
Go for it.
Agricult a few years ago penalised me for growing a cover crop because suddenly you had to put in cultivations, an extra cultivation into your year's rotation, and the fuel usage on that. So I don't know. Have you improved it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole picture. Because if you look at one specific thing, yes, there's more fuel, say cover crops, but if that is a winter, if it's capturing nitrogen in the winter, sort of 15 odd kilos of nitrogen you're recycling back into the next crop will totally overcompensate for any extra fuel. So you've got to look at all. It's quite interesting whenever you do these. Well, let's make this change. You look at the carbon impact. You see a simple change. Oh, right. You've got to do a few iterations to sort of work through the. Hopefully you'll see additional benefits, or you might see something that cancels it out. It's a bit like straw for muck. It's great to get the nutrients back, but you use quite a lot of fuel to do it. But in the short term, it doesn't look great. But if you look a bit further out, if you're going to improve your soil organic matter, actually it starts to make sense. So it's a simple. Any of these things, you look at them in a simple way, you can get a slightly wrong result. So that's perhaps what happened in this case.
So really what you're saying is once the system has been going a few years, everything's in balance and cycling, things are starting to pay for themselves instead of looking at year one and it's all cost and no benefit.
Exactly. Well, that's a challenge for Agricult and other tools, is to take a longer view and really capture those longer term benefits, which is obviously that's what you're doing on your own farm. You've changed your strategy for longer term.
I think a carbon calculation, it's going to be here to stay. Every industry's impacted, requiring to demonstrate their carbon. The tools are a bit like the industry. It's fragmented. There's too many of them. They're all not working to the same standard. They give different results, not the same science. We need guidance as to what's acceptable so that there's a commonality there. We need a common framework to report by.
There's a consultant clap in there. So. Any questions? Okay, well, since we're on that topic, Julian, the carbon footprint, your calculator provides yourself and your clients with a lot of information. Is there a pattern with a high or a low carbon footprint, and how is that reflected in the profitability of the same business?
Okay, so generally the first rule is if you're looking at changing what you're doing, if you do not, anything that affects output, it's quite hard to counteract. So we've got farms that you can get to low carbon footprint per ton of grain in quite different ways, either through having really high output, really efficient use of resources, and you get a low per kilo emissions per ton of grain, or you can have a lower output, low input system and end up at a quite similar figure. You just got to be really careful that you don't, that you maintain output if you are reducing inputs, because anything that has a major impact on output, I mean, we've seen that with cultivation. If you can get the cultivation right and have good establishment, that's brilliant. But if there's any impact on your yield, you're back to square one. So that's the challenge that farmers face. If they change to try and improve things, it's two steps forward. They've got to be careful it's not one step back. And but as I say, we've seen farmers get to low carbon emissions, certainly per ton of output, in completely different ways that suit their system. So there's not necessarily one exact way of doing it.
So really what you're saying is it's down to business efficiency. You can be either high cost and efficient with lots of output, or you can be low cost with a moderate level of output and you're going to get the same number.
No, definitely. We've got them in the same bracket. And, well, just sort of a slightly different example. Dairy, we see exactly the same thing. Really high intensive dairies, and then the really grass-based systems come out, some of the best ones. It's not necessarily the system, it's how good you are at implementing it and improving it. It's actually more important. died. Oh, it's not died. Yeah, so it's the farmer, not the farming system, you could argue.
Okay. Any questions from the floor? Gentleman there, please.
Very quick, simple question. What's the future of fertiliser?
Go for it.
We need to look at R&D for crops, varieties going forward. We might have to look back at the older varieties we've got because they just coped with less inputs that we currently have. Fertilisers here, because we've got a growing population in the world. My mother was born, there was 3 billion people. She's still alive, and we're cracking on nearly 9 billion. So we've got a lot of mouths to feed. We need to... it's a blended approach. So is it getting more livestock onto arable farms? I don't know. To improve the output, but also to reduce the input on artificial fertilisers.
I think in terms of fertiliser, there are obviously the big manufacturers are working on things like Yara and other companies working on sort of lower carbon. They're using new technology to reduce the carbon emissions of fertiliser. You've also got inhibitors and things in the fertilisers to reduce emissions. But actually, from the farmer's point of view, that may obviously cut emissions, let's say, in fertiliser, but the power is getting handed to the manufacturer. And so what are the options for farmers to either produce their own fertiliser? So it's Crichton, SRUC are putting in a plasma generator for the slurry to generate create nitrogen. That's going to be a trial. We're going to see obviously cost effectiveness of that in terms of capturing nitrogen out of the air. But at least there's a bit of control there of the farmers generating that benefit themselves. And so in terms of what can the farmers themselves do to either reduce fertiliser use or make more efficient use of it or generate their own, whether it's the traditional way via livestock or potential new technologies could do that too.
I would just add, it's not fertiliser on its own. You've got to take it in the round and work out how you can reduce, replace varieties, systems, the whole lot.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Right, Roddy, you're back in the spotlight again. So, so say as a farmer, and he's currently got a very high output system and a little bit of debt around him, and he's looking to change to a more low cost system. It's quite a leap of faith to do that, and to still pay for your interest and capital on debt. So. How have you seen some of your clients that have gone that way? What have they done, and how have you helped?
Yeah, a lot of them, as I said at the start, they've done it in small steps to prove it to themselves before they go wholesale into it. We are exercising ourselves to see how we can support customers on a more wholesale transition of the farm. When you look at the research that's been done, and some of it's been done by GHI, there's a period of between 2 and 6 years, depending on farm and farming systems, where productivity, cash generation productivity can fall, but then it picks up again. And we're looking to see what sort of innovative solutions we can perhaps deliver or may be able to deliver by ourselves in partnership with insurers, government, etc. But it's at very early nascent stages just now, so we haven't got the answers yet. We're thinking we need to be more innovative than just giving a capital repayment holiday, which could be done just now, but doesn't really solve the issues. So it's work in progress for us, and we'll see where it goes. I'm hopeful that we will be able to come up with a solution. But it's about sharing that challenge, risk and reward. It's not just all coming back to the farmer. It has to be looking along up and down the supply chain. We launched a funding proposition with McCain for their 250 potato growers up and down Britain. Very simple. They had identified pieces of kit that would make the potato production more sustainable. Their growers all go on a journey. So we have come in with something to help do that, and McCain's are also putting some skin in the game. But out in the back of that, we have had our CEO wrote to 11 corporates, food retailers, food manufacturers, a range of other organisations involved in farming. We've had, of those 11, 9 of them have come back to ask if we can come and talk to them to see how we can work together to help their supply chain. And more importantly, we had 2 other organisations come independently say, can we have some discussions to see how we can help the sector across the food system work together to deliver and share the risk and reward.
Thank you. Stuart? What was your first step? Sorry? What was your first step? You went from your old system to what you're doing just now, because it was a bit of a leap of faith for you.
Watching one of the neighbours who was min-till for 20 odd years, looking at his crops and going, actually, he's not spending a huge amount of money here, but getting a fantastic yields. I would say I've always been one for experimenting on the farm. YouTube's a great place to go and look for new machinery ideas, and just being slightly different to everyone else. And the neighbours coming to you and asking you, what have you done, why you've done that. It's just having a leap of faith. Currently we've got a Bednar drill. There's only one in Scotland. No one else has got one. It's a fantastic bit of kit because no other manufacturers are doing what it can do. But then again, you might say, why is only one? But I've taken a leap of faith there.
Thank you. Go for it.
Yes. Mary Monroe, Stoughton Parker. I think that on a farm scale, yes, there are lots of things that people can do and different systems can be adjusted to be more efficient. But I think the theme of this session is very much about reducing inputs, being more at the beck and call of environmental pressure, and very little about rewarding producers with an increase in price for all this extra effort and all this technology that's being put in. And people still have to make a profit from their business. And I think that it's all very well having policy direction towards the environment and reduced inputs, but there has to be some reward for the businesses involved.
Is there a question there, Mary, or no? Just a comment.
Thanks, Mary. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that it's vital important, obviously, the support and how that's targeted to the farming sector. But just bear in mind, those payments have not increased for decades, right? And inflation is going so high, right? So that lever is much smaller than it used to be on the farm, isn't it? So it's actually the market that is... Yeah. Yeah, well, so I think just by default, the market has become more and more important because the input costs have risen. The cost of food, grain is higher. Yes, I know it's costing a lot more to grow it, but the share of the subsidy is so much smaller than it used to be. It's not such a big lever to action to the farmer.
Doesn't the UK only produce 2 or 3% of the wheat production in the world? So we're minor, basically. So yeah, maybe we need to look at other crops.
Anyone else? I'm not seeing anyone waving at me frantically. Is anybody out there that's thinking about reducing their cost to go to a less conventional system at all? We've got Stuart here. Any questions that you're looking to, or you unanswered questions you have if you're in that position? Oh, there's one hand there.
Have you tried growing spring barley with your minimum input system yet? And how's establishment and yield gone so far?
Spring barley this year was put in after the plough, but also after cover crops. And it was direct drilled into the cover crop. I would say the system works, but killing the cover crop off at the right time, i.e. 6 to 8 weeks prior. I would love to drill it on the green, but that causes other complications because it actually keeps the soil wet. When you kill it off earlier, the soil will actually dry out quicker, which seems a bit odd because you think the roots would take in the moisture out, but we found it doesn't. We're going down that route of direct drilling more, using cover crops and drilling straight into them. We'll be doing that for years to come. Monitor Farm will be experimenting with that as well. The plough has a place, and that is if you do have a major weed burden on your farm. A plough can also be like a break crop, like potatoes, because you are completely destroying the soil, putting it back to a reset button. But min-till and direct drill is the way forward.